Imagine having a positive impact on the brains of a billion people, asks HealthTech Connect's President and Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Ryan Darcy. He goes on to say, that is our bold vision. The company develops transformative innovations in brain health. One such instrument is the neurocatch platform, the world's first deployable, objective, and rapid measuring tool of brain function. The data collected from the neurocatch device is shared with the Center for Neurology Studies, which is generating quality evidence and mobilizing groundbreaking neurological assessments and treatments for use at the Surrey Neuroplasticity Clinic. All of these medical and life sciences facilities are part of an expanding community of leading-edge research and biomedical companies in Surrey. The growth of life sciences and biomedical companies in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia is extraordinary, and in fact, it's turning the region into an internationally recognized center of excellence. The sector includes more than 2,000 companies employing more than 18,000 people, and it's an industry valued in the billions of dollars. It's expanded by more than 13% over the last 4 years, and it continues to attract international talent and investment. I invited Dr. Ryan Darcy to join me for a conversation that matters about his work, why you should care, what it means to you and your brain health, and what needs to be done to ensure that this sector continues to develop here in British Columbia. Dr. Darcy, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
How is it that we are in British Columbia surging forward in the development of innovative neurological testing and studies that are producing like usable on-the-ground results?
Well, that's an excellent question. We weren't always. Historically, Canada's been very strong in neuroscience, and over the last 20 years, there's been a push to make that more translational. And I think that BC's strengths, as far, let's say 10 years ago, they really started to catch up. They were not at the top of the country. There were, provinces like Ontario, for example, Nova Scotia and Halifax were very, very much leading the way. Alberta would be another example. And it was largely an initiative, kind of an organic initiative 10 years ago to try to start to change that, to bring in innovation and to bring in translation so that a lot of the major breakthroughs that you find in science laboratories were making their way to where we needed our care. And that's happened quite rapidly, and it's been a very exciting thing to be a part of over the last 10 years.
So was that what ensured that you stayed here working with SFU and then doing your work to build out what is now becoming part of a very important center of excellence around brain research?
Yeah. If you can imagine, when I came back to the province, I was so excited to get back to my home, and I ended up landing in Surrey, which was, as many people thought, was just not a place that you would find something like this. And what we saw was this incredible greenfield opportunity to build a translational cluster called the Health and Technology District and make it a global leading innovation sort of center. And at the tip of that spear, for sure, was our brain imaging technologies and advances in treatments and therapies.
So tell me about the neurocatch device. Like, what was the genesis of that coming together, and then how does it work?
For sure. Neurocatch was born out of a frustration, actually. We have capabilities in our advanced brain imaging labs that are like science fiction level. It's incredible how powerful we can peer non-invasively into your brain and watch your brain in action. With these super and just amazing technologies. And they exist in advanced laboratories in universities and hospitals around the world. And the world is pushing forward all this knowledge of how our brains work. But the frustration was that none of that was getting beyond the university and the ivory towers. And none of it was solving a long-standing problem where the way that we actually evaluate how your brain works and then hopefully find treatments hadn't really changed that much in 30 or 40 years. And so there was this frustration that we had to find. I personally wanted to see this get out in the world. Not only a scientist, I'm a taxpayer. I'm a passionate Canadian, and I thought it just wasn't acceptable to see a technology that we knew could make a difference in objectively measuring how your brain was, in being sensitive to changes in your highest level prized cognitive skills, just reside in academic laboratories. So we started on the mission to develop a brain scanner that's portable and deployable called neurocatch. And how neurocatch works, it's accessible, so it's rapid. It's like a blood pressure cuff. We actually modeled it off of what, if we can do this for the heart, can we do it for the brain? And it operates in minutes. We've deployed it to a number of different places where you would require care, be it hospitals or clinics, but also actually we've had it in the pontoons of float planes and helicopters and care homes, hockey arenas, football field sides, you name it. So it's allowed us to bring the advances that we would find in our incredibly sophisticated laboratories to the front lines of care.
So what's it look like? How do you put it into service when dealing with somebody?
For sure. Neurocatch comes in a small box. It is a cap you put on your head with sensors that record your brain activity. There are only a small number of sensors, and we put a little bit of gel in so that the sensors can record, without ever having to poke or prod you, your brain activity from the surface of your scalp. And then what we do is we actually stimulate your brain. So you will hear noises, beeps or tones and words. And what we can do is actually stimulate responses we know and record them from these sensors, record your brain activity, and then measure to see if you have your brain activity fits within healthy, normal cognitive ranges. And it does that all in 6 minutes. So it's automated and very rapid.
So are you measuring all parts of the brain? Because, we have prefrontal cortex, you have the left and right hemispheres, the occipital lobe, and so on. Like, how is it that you're able to stimulate all those regions and be able to gather that much information so quickly?
Yeah, so to use a computer analogy, you can ping the system, which is what we do. So we ping your nervous system. And your nervous system, if you imagine it like an incredibly complex computer, in order to perform your thinking and your cognition, it requires your whole brain to act in a symphony, a synchrony, so to speak. And that creates these brain waves. And so when we ping the system and then we have sensors just placed on the top of your head, we can actually record those and make sure that the system is working according to as it should be. And it's really in that way that simple.
What does a normally functioning, healthy brain look like when you get this data? Like, what are you looking at? Is it a chart? Is it an image? Are you seeing electrical currents? How do you start to decipher what has been measured?
So that's what's really interesting. This capability's been around for a long time. For almost coming up 100 years, we've known how to record your brain's electrical activity. And we've known how to actually probe and understand how your brain processes things. So back again to the analogy of your brain being a supercomputer, which it is. It's the world's greatest supercomputer. What we did is we took the way to ping it so that we could get a record of your brain processing information as it goes from low-level sensory processing, so if you hear something, to higher level attention. So if you're walking in the woods and you hear a stick snap, you're going to turn and orient because it's either a stick snapping because someone stepped on it or it's a bear, right? So we actually probe that response. And then at a higher level, as you're listening to the words I'm saying now, your brain has responses to those as well, and we probe for that response. So we get 3 key responses: an auditory sensory response, your basic attention, and then your cognitive processing. And with those 3 responses, we quite literally just measure the size and the timing of them to create a normal map of what that should look like. And then when we get your brain waves, we compare yours against the normal map. So much like when you get blood pressure and you know 120/80 is normal, now you can come in and say, okay, I'd like to see how my brain's responses match with what is normal.
So let's say you feel that you have normal, healthy cognitive function, but you're going, okay, is there any chance that I might be experiencing early signs of dementia? Are you able to start to determine whether or not there is some deterioration there that can be identified early on?
Yes, that's one of the strong powers and advantages of this and recording objectively your brainwaves. We're so sensitive to subtle changes in your thinking that we can tell the difference in young people's cognition versus people who are older age. And we know that as we age, one of the things that happens is our cognitive abilities, they slow slightly. And we can actually detect that difference. So right now, just before doing this podcast, we were finishing one of our recent scientific studies looking at people who are in care homes with dementia versus those that didn't have dementia. And those differences on the neurocatch are very, very large and very noticeable.
So let's say you identify early that somebody is in those early stages of dementia. What's the benefit of having that information that can help them hopefully slow down that process and have a better quality of life?
Excellent question. So in medicine, one very well-known axiom is that you can't treat what you can't measure. So we really focused on solving this measurement problem. Can we have an objective and sensitive measure of how your brain is doing? What that does is that immediately has healthcare benefits at a larger level. So in sort of clinical studies and clinical trials, it means that we can start to find drug treatments and other treatments that work. But at our individual level, it also means that we can measure what treatments are working for us. So again, if you go back to the comparison to blood pressure, if I come into the doctor and I'm worried about my cardiovascular health, one of the very first things that happens is they'll take my blood pressure. And if my blood pressure comes out high, I know what 120/80 is. And if it comes out at 160/80, we might start looking and saying, okay, well, let's measure that. Let's make sure, how's the salt in your diet? How's your stress? Are you getting enough exercise? And if I start to do those things and I see that now when I measure again, my result is in 120/80, I know I'm treating my cardiovascular health. And effectively, neurocatch works exactly the same way. We can find now treatments that help people.
So in my introduction, I talked about the fact that you also share this data with the Center for Neuroplasticity. And if we take a look at what we're truly understanding now about the neuroplasticity of the brain, if let's say you have a patient that comes in that suffered a stroke or had trauma to the brain and there is, a loss of function, do you start by measuring and the neurocatch gives you a baseline that you then can start to measure against how effective the treatments are?
Yes, we do that. One of the greatest and most rewarding parts of what we do here is, and I think this is true to say, we're unique in this way in the world. And by that, what I mean is we have top leading centers like the Mayo Clinics and the Cornells sending patients to us, right? Because we have the capability to take people with a brain injury or a brain disease and make a difference where nowhere else could they find that capability. And you alluded to exactly how we do it. We will measure not just with the neurocatch, but we'll measure a number of different aspects of how your brain is today. We will then look at the leading new innovations in therapies and treatments that we've particularly put through clinical trials so we know they work. And where we can apply them to your situation, we will implement them in our clinic. And then every week, on a daily and weekly basis, We see people who were thought that they had a chronic brain condition and that was what they had to live for the rest of their life. And we are changing that story in many, many cases. So it's incredibly rewarding.
Recently, I conducted an interview with Dr. Doug Clement. You may know him from UBC Sports Medicine Clinic and the Harry Jerome Classic and the Vancouver Sun Run and so on. When he was in his mid-60s, it didn't matter, unfortunately, that he was as healthy as he was, he had a massive stroke. And this is going back some 20 odd years ago. And he said, in his mind, even though he didn't have the evidence then, he believed that he could change the final prognosis of what the trauma to his brain was. And he almost independently taught himself how to walk and talk and reestablish his life. To have these kinds of resources now makes a big difference. And what he points out is we're now proving that just because you've had a stroke or you've had trauma doesn't mean that the brain cannot find another way to perform the functions that are so vital to being able to have a good life.
Yes, yeah, that's a really interesting emerging area I would want viewers to know about. When I was trained as a neuroscientist, and I actually, a large part of my training was in stroke rehabilitation in the hospitals, the concept that your brain your brain would develop as you were growing from sort of birth to into your 20s. But then what was taught was that after that place, it got fixed. And in the research laboratories, they were looking at this concept of neuroplasticity, which is basically a fancy science word for your brain's ability to innately rewire new circuits and regain abilities. And if you think about it just a little bit, that has to be true because we can learn throughout our life. So every time we're learning, we're rewiring a new circuit. And that's a form of neuroplasticity. But what's happened and what's happening now is that we are understanding that there's this incredible power that lies within all of our brains to rewire our lost abilities through neuroplasticity. And that's being applied in stroke and in brain injury and in a host of different neurologic diseases and injuries. It's resided with us the whole time. But I feel like we're grabbing the tiger by the tail now because we're learning how to harness that power and how to change what's happened to you in a positive way.
So the average viewer is going to say, okay, well, that sounds great. I keep hearing about all these kinds of advances. Isn't it fantastic that the southwest corner of British Columbia is moving forward? How do I get access to this? Or is this just, once again, something that is available on a research basis? Or is this actually available now?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a very common sentiment. When we see things come out, be it on the news or whatever, your immediate thought is, okay, well, that's awesome, but when is that ever going to come into the world? That's actually what we're focused at doing here in Surrey in the Health and Technology District, is that translating this to immediate benefit. That is our mission and our ethos. So what we do to create access is we first develop innovative technologies like neurocatch. We then actually use our measuring system to find the most innovative treatments on the planet. And often they will want to come here and do clinical trials. So we will curate them, we'll do studies and make sure they are what they say they are. And when let's say that you get access to the clinical trial, but not all people do. So to expand on access, what we have done is we've created a clinic called the Surrey Neuroplasticity Clinic, which actually provides the access to these things. From there, we actually expand it further and have a network of collaborators and partners and clinics that's expanding not just in BC and across Canada, but across the United States and further to provide greater access. That for any given technology or intervention, that's always at a different stage. But there are many, many cases right now where people are coming to find us here to get access to these things sooner than they'll make it out in the world. And that's a really rewarding part of what we do. We are not one of these stories that, okay, I'll never see it. We're the opposite. It's here, it's helping. It does that on a daily basis.
So how accessible is it then in Surrey? Like, how does somebody, I literally say, how does somebody get there? Because I'm sure there are going to be people who are going to say, okay, I want that. I know that I'm one of them. I go, I want you to try that, because one of my concerns in life is I want to make sure that I maintain the best possible cognitive function for as long as possible. And when I asked Dr. Max Sinader how to do that, he said, well, die young. And I don't, that's not the outcome that I want. I'd like to be able to come and have access to these kinds of instruments and know what I can do.
Yeah, so certainly I would say it's as simple as having access to a computer and being able to Google the Surrey Neuroplasticity Clinic and reach out to them. And they are in place to do exactly that, provide an access portal to all the things we do here. And it's absolutely the case that I always am more than interested to talk to people and to help along the way. And if you get to the Surrey Neuroplasticity Clinic, you get to me. So I think that's the short answer to the question is start there.
What else needs to be done to ensure that you have the resources that you need to be able to expand this work, to make Surrey and southwestern British Columbia the true center of excellence? I mean, you're already starting to attract that attention, but are there other resources that you need to be able to expand on the quality and the scope of your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer that in terms of our mandate to positively impact 1 billion people. So that when you're trying to change the world, you have to set yourself scary goals, and that certainly in the earliest days was a scary goal. It's not so scary to us anymore because we're seeing the rate of expansion and uptake be quite quick and encouraging. I think the two things that I would say we need, because we're in a scaling up place, is increased awareness, just like the show we're doing right now. This is valuable. More often than not, what we hear is people didn't even realize that was an option, or people didn't even realize this was all in Surrey, right? So it's really valuable that more and more people are aware of what's out there that can help them. And that's definitely one thing. Then the other part of what we're doing is and this is an interesting aspect, many people, I think, expect that this happens in our universities and our hospitals, but our public system is not built really to do these sorts of things. Our hospitals are, as we all know, in COVID times, are overloaded. Our universities are really focused on studying problems. They're not necessarily in a position of devising the solutions for those problems. They're experts at understanding them. What we do here is we use the power of business in terms of creating new innovative products and services to drive these models forward such that they can make it back to our hospitals and our universities. And so the other key thing that we work for is getting more mechanisms of supporting novel, innovative healthcare options. So our third-party payers, our insurers, and those sorts of things are really valuable because we're starting to provide evidence that suggests if you're on long-term disability, for example, we can change that. And our taxpayers don't have to have a lifelong burden, or you don't have to have a lifelong burden. And so the evidence coming out of here, getting connected with the systems that can help create better access, is also critical.
Well, I encourage people to look you up, to go find out more. I think that what you're doing is extraordinary. I've been out there to Surrey, and it's impressive. As you say, people don't even know that it's there. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today and bring us up to speed on not just your work, but the impact that it's having on British Columbia. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This was just really great. Thank you.
I wasn't going to add this in, but I got thinking about it. I went, okay, so Rick Hansen's from Williams Lake, and through his work, he's attracted so much research into spinal cord research, and you're from Williams Lake, and you're, becoming this magnetic center around neuroscience. So what is it that's in the water in Williams Lake?
It's not the first time we've joked and asked about the question. There's a number we've discovered some other major innovators. Rowena Rosati, who was part of this and a major mover and shaker, also born in Williams Lake. So Billy's Puddle has a bit of a legacy to the province.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you call it? Whose puddle?
Billy's puddle.
Billy's puddle. Oh, that's good. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
If you've grown up in it, you can, I've got a collection. I love Williams Lake. It's
Yeah.
part of definitely my history. But yeah, I've got some fun stories about the growing up in Williams Lake.
One of the other things that I like is you, like Mark O'Mara, who's out at BC Cancer, was from here, educated here, went away, came back. But it's only because of the change in the landscape here, seeing this growing community of excellence. And I think that we need to celebrate what we're doing here in BC far more than we do.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge with BC is it's got, I've been quoted as talking about it sort of competes too much within, rather than recognizing that it has that the bigger and larger competition is globally and beyond our boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think that the concept of really lifting ourselves up is a critical one.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think about the work that Alan Eves has done down at Stem Cell Technologies, and he has, this vision, and yet I know that there are people, stem cell, everything stem cell. But let's celebrate him and what he's doing, because he's helping to attract a tremendous talent and innovation that's going to come to the area and will continue to grow.
Yeah, my hypothesis is that it's a misperception or a misconception around the scarcity of resources.
Yeah.
So I think that basically the competition comes in the fear that if somebody else is doing well, it means you won't get resources.
Right.
And rather than thinking about the concept of that resources don't have to just be what's available in our province, it can be our country, our the greater North America. And when you start to then take the strengths in this province and partner them or support them, and there are many great examples. Abcellera is another one, right? There's some incredibly massive powerhouse stuff coming out of this province. And when it starts to actually sort of converge and coordinate, I think that's when you would not have to be worried about resources, because we'll drive our economies and we'll drive success for each other.
I'll sort of wrap up by telling you I'm always motivated when I recall a quote from Aristotle, who said, "It's the responsibility of each of us to realize our full potential, because a failure to do so is a loss to all of society."
I love that quote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I love that quote.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Hope to meet you someday in person. And
definitely. Yeah, this was fun. Thanks so much, Stuart.